Welcome to another episode of the Data Science Leaders Podcast. I am your host, Dave Cole, and today's guest is David Von Dollen. David is the head of AI for the Americas at Volkswagen. David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Great. So the topics we're going to be covering today, we're going to be talking about CRISP DM, sort of an acronym. What is it? It's a process that David has taken and sort of made his own, and love to hear a little bit about that. The second thing we're going to be talking about, which is again a pretty common theme, is building out horizontal relationships within the organization. We're going to be talking about David's philosophy there. And then last but not least, talking about data science outside of work. So, taking your data science expertise and applying it to the world outside of Volkswagen. And David's got some interesting takes there. So why don't we start at the top? David, what is CRISP DM?
Okay, so CRISP-DM is a process and a methodology. It was invented or conceived of in 1996 by IBM and a couple of different organizations. And essentially, what it is a way to allow business and data science teams to understand different phases of data science projects, or originally it was for data mining, but you could extend it to data science or machine learning or AI. And it's cyclic, so you have different phases within CRISP-DM. So you have a business understanding phase, a data understanding phase, a data preparation phase, modeling, evaluation, and then eventually deployment. And the reason why I think it's useful is that you can use it to help the business understand the phases that a data science project might need to go through before reaching an eventual deployment, where you might need to establish some proof of concept or try to test out some hypotheses, and answer some questions before moving towards pushing something fully in production.
Right. So it starts with, this is pretty standard stuff, right? Like understanding the business, making sure you understand the data, then actually doing some of the data preparation. At what point, and then modeling, evaluation, et cetera. But at what point do you in this process? Well, actually, before I ask that question, how have you made this process your own? I mean, have you just taken this process as is, or have you actually changed it up?
So one way that we've, I'm not going to take full credit for it. I have to, give credit to my colleagues and people that I've worked with, and the current AI team. It's a continual process of refinement. But one way that we've kind of hybridized it is we've integrated into an agile process. So as projects, as you develop a new feature, a new epic for a product or for an initiative, you can integrate. You can use these phases to integrate into story points that fall under that epic, that you can map to agile sprint cycles, and then understand through a feedback process of where you're at in your project lifecycle, and iterate to eventually move towards deployment.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you've implemented a bit of a hybrid, right? Because if you look, I'm staring at the diagram here. It is a circle, right? As you might imagine, when you deploy the model, you end up learning new things. You want to end up adding additional features. So that's where that sort of cycle comes into play. But it's I imagine if you have 5, 6, 7 sort of projects going on at any one point in time, like are each of these phases, is the business do they understand where you are in each of the phases of all these various models that you're trying to build? Is that sort of where it's helpful? Like, where does the
Yes.
business also where's the business sort of come into play in the various stages?
I think that, using an agile methodology, you can set up a regular cadence with the business so that, you have check-ins, you're working towards sprint goals, which are linked to larger milestones. And I think in a data science context, those milestones are going to link to certain questions that you might ask of your data set, right?
Hmm.
You might have a hypothesis, or the business might want to build a model around the data, or um, predict, make some prediction around the data. And so one of the first things you can do is test those assumptions, using this process. And I think what it also does is it helps people to understand that it's not necessarily linear, it's more cyclical. The dependencies between different phases can, can cycle back and forth, right? You can go from understanding the business problem to asking a question in response to that, and then going and exploring your data, and generating some descriptive statistics around your data, and then that might refine your understanding of the business problem, and so then you reformulate that again, and so it can cycle around. And what you can also do, well, the reason why I like to tie it to agile is because you eventually want to move towards a deployment. You don't want to stay in this
Right.
cycle forever. So I think what it can do is it can help you to understand where you're at in your project, but it can also, if you're deploying like a minimum viable product, it can help you to iterate to get closer and closer towards that deployment.
Right, and I can imagine that what I do know about Crisp DM is, while it looks, when you look at the diagram, right, of all the various phases, it does look waterfall esque. The thinking behind it is that as you understand the requirements, as you start to look at the data and you start to prep the data, if there's a missing data piece or what have you, these you don't necessarily have to go to the next step. You can go back to the business and say, hey, what we're trying, your hypothesis here is missing a feature which is going to prevent us from actually moving forward in this project. We need to revisit like how we're going to attack this problem, how we're going to
Yep.
build this model. So that to me seems like that makes a lot of sense to me, right? And it seems like it's a little bit of a mix of understanding where you are in the process, right, and what step comes next, and who is responsible for owning these various stages in Crisp DM, but also with some practicality to it, right, when it comes to understanding the data and et cetera. Where is that? Do I have that right? I guess I should
Absolutely.
pause there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another important feature is that it allows a data scientist to really track, what has been done before. I think a
Right.
lot of times in projects, you can get caught up in between these loops, and you might not keep track of what you're doing. And maybe you tested your model with certain hyperparameters and got a certain set of results, and then you might find yourself kind of going around in circles. So, if you, I think integrating it with Agile allows you to document it. So then you
Hmm.
understand, you can look back at the whole timeline of the project and understand how certain things evolved, and what you might have tried in the past that worked or didn't work, and then build on top of that.
Great. And then how about the roles on your team, right? And are they, do you have a single data scientist sort of doing all of these things, or are there various roles, based on where you are in the process?
So that's a great question. I think so. The way I see the formulation of a really crack data science team, a really top notch team would be, um, you might have some software engineers that be help in building out all these systems, and as we kind of might have mentioned before, kind of doing more data centric uh, AI,
Hmm.
or maybe more data engineering type tasks, looking at um, building out and maintaining different databases and repositories, working on building out different systems, to process that data and to build pipelines to, transform and do feature engineering and selection. And then you might have your more traditional data scientists who are more, coming from a statistics or machine learning, computer science background, whose bread and butter is building machine learning models and maybe researching the state of the art and working towards practical applications of that. You might have other people who are responsible with interfacing with the business or working towards helping enabling like a self-service model for descriptive statistics. And then you might also have people who are more data visualization people. Maybe that kind of goes hand in hand with the last case. People who can distill the business problem and technical solution, and then translate that back in a way that's like very easily digestible. So
yeah, that's storytelling. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that you do have multiple roles on your team that do get engaged at various stages. So knowing when you've gone from one stage to the next, is sort of a tip off to that team that they need to get in, or that individual that they need to get engaged. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, you can also have experts in different domain areas. So you could have an expert in logistics and optimization, or another expert, in computer vision, one in natural language processing. You have all these different applications of AI that you can that could potentially be owned by people on your team or various teams. But generally, I think within the team, I think what I try and do as a data science leader is facilitate open information, knowledge sharing. We're all pretty much pushing towards the same goal. I mean, if you look at the different pillars of AI, natural language processing, computer vision. I mean, there's so much research that has been done and is currently being done. So just sharing that information amongst the group, I think, is also a key point that I try and support as a leader.
Do you have any advice to fellow DSLs out there around the best ways to sort of share knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, it can be informal, as writing a blog post or sharing a Medium article in a Slack app, or it can be facilitating kind of lunch and learns, where you might be investigating a new technology. People might be talking about a new paper that is there's a new algorithm that's been developed that is beating state of the art. So I think just facilitating those kinds of conversations, keep things interesting for teams, make people feel like they're engaged.
Yeah, I think with the pace of innovation going on in the world of data science, like if you're not carving time out to do those things, you can kind of be left behind. Switching gears here, I'd like to move on to our next topic, talking about building out horizontal relationships in the organization. So how do you view your key stakeholders, and how do you what advice do you have in building out those relationships?
So I think the first thing is trying to understand their pain, right? Understand where are the bottlenecks, where are the KPIs that they're measuring their performance against, that could be improved through data science, machine learning, or data. Once you have an understanding in that domain, and you can set up that communication with your stakeholder, then it becomes a lot easier to figure out how to translate that pain into a solution, a potential
Right.
solution. And that way you can find kind of these win-win scenarios. I think there's a lot of people thinking about how to push, machine learning into production nowadays, and thinking
Yeah.
about, you know, productionalizing AI. And at the end of the day, you have to think about your end user and how are they going to use your machine learning models or your algorithms to optimize their process, or to automate some mundane task, or drive some KPI that you know that it might be a source of pain for them.
Right. So you got to get to know them. You got to understand the KPIs they care about, what bottlenecks they
Hmm.
have, and then when you mention win-win, I assume you're talking about if potentially solving problems for them that also you personally are maybe currently working on, or something along those lines.
Right.
What is your opinion, as you're building out those relationships and as you're understanding, what success is? What is your opinion on the role of you as a DSL? Like, are you someone who sees yourself as sort of being essentially a shared service, to the various parts of Volkswagen? Do you, think about how to potentially allow your users to self-serve? So, maybe building out a platform that allows them to answer questions on their own. Like, where do you fall, in your opinion here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So you could think about it from the different levels of kind of analytics, right? You have descriptive, analytics, kind of descriptive statistics at the bottom level. What is happening in my business? What are some statistics that I can track to understand the current state of the business, right? So that at a on the lowest level, I think organizations that set up self-service models just for that can become quicker, more agile, can start tracking how they um, can become more efficient.
Hmm.
Um, then, on a if you take another level up, you can then you think about predictive analytics, and that's where a data science team comes in,
Hmm.
essentially, because you're using machine learning to augment that process. You're thinking a step ahead, right? What's happening today, but what's going to happen tomorrow, and then at the highest level, you have kind of optimizing analytics, where you take your prediction and you optimize based off of your prediction. So um, I think when you think about things from a descriptive level, those are the things that you want to try and automate, and
Hmm.
you want to try and enable people with. With the machine learning component, it becomes a little more trickier, but I think we're entering kind of an era now where automated machine learning is becoming more prevalent in the
Yeah.
enterprise. And I don't think we're ever gonna, as data science folks, we're ever gonna automate ourselves out of a job. But I think there's always going to be a need for people to, you know, test our assumptions, and test the pipelines, and make sure everything is, um, make sure the models are performing the way they should, and monitoring for concept drift and that kind of thing.
Right.
So I think that's kind of where I lie in regards to automated, self-service ML. Is I think it's a great place to enable businesses, and I definitely agree with enabling self-service AI. I also, think that it's good to also be skeptical and help people to understand that, your machine learning model is not always going to be 100% correct, and understanding the trade-offs of
Right.
what are the risks when the machine learning model is wrong. How does that translate uh, to business value? So that's where a data science team can come in
Yeah.
and help.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm hearing you say that like on the descriptive side, I think there have been solutions in place for self-serve that have been around for some time. I think when it comes to more predictive analytics, that's where sort of tread cautiously, handle with care. Um, you it sounds like from a self-serve standpoint, it's probably more of a partnership than just here's the auto ML solution, have at it, build models on your own. It sounds like you would advocate for more of a partnership between your team and the business side of the house.
I think, yeah, I think so because when you're building a model, you might be approximating your data somehow that might be underfitting,
Mm-hmm.
your data, or might be overfitting, and so I think there's that classic trade-off in data science that we're constantly as machine learning practitioners trying to figure out how to build models that generalize well, that are explainable, um, that and so I think all those dimensions are things that you want to bring help people to understand instead of just sitting them down in front of a UI and just being like, okay,
How
here's
about
some
it?
data.
Well, let's move on to the next topic. Talking about data science outside of work. So I know this is a passion of yours, and I think most of us, who are passionate about the art of data science, um, I think would welcome the opportunity to potentially solve challenges outside of our workday. What is your philosophy on it, and what have you done there?
Um, so, I've kind of been in a constant state of uh, professional development and personal development. I definitely believe in lifelong learning,
Yeah.
and there's so many different areas that are that data science overlaps with that um, I find really interesting. Um, and one organization that I'd like to give a shout out to is DataKind. I'm sure a lot of folks have heard about DataKind. I've never actually been directly involved with one of their projects, but
Mm-hmm.
they're doing work that I think is really commendable. They're using data science to understand global poverty, you know, using time series to improve access to sanitary conditions and water. Um, and to me, I think we're living in an age where we have access to so much information and systems to process that information. Um, I think using our time towards better benefiting humanity in better ways um, can only be a good thing, right? So you can build up your AI superpowers, but how are you going to help humanity with those AI superpowers? And so that's what I like to think about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those of you out there can certainly research DataKind, but it certainly looks very interesting. Basically using data to help various humanitarian issues like education, poverty, human rights, etc. I think
Yeah.
all of us, if we have the time, or even if we don't, make the time to potentially use using our brain power to help there, it would be great. I certainly am fascinated by it, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So, well, David, I really enjoyed the conversation. Is there anything else you want to leave us with? Any pearls of wisdom?
Um, just make sure to always QA your stuff before pushing to production.
Yes, I think all of us have dealt with the pitfalls of not stringently QAing our models before they make their way into production. So David, I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. If people want to reach out to you on LinkedIn and shoot you questions, is that okay?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, David, I really appreciate it, and thanks for taking the time.